Honourable Senators, I see that we have quorum. We are a small but mighty group that transitions, and I declare this meeting in session. So welcome to this meeting of the Subcommittee on Veterans Affairs. And before I begin, I would like to ask all senators and other in-person participants to consult the cards on your desk in front of you. This is the guidelines to prevent audio feedback incidents. So please take note of the following preventative measures in place for the protection and health and safety of all participants, including our interpreters who are in the booth behind me. If possible, ensure that you're seated in a manner that increases the distance between the microphones. Only use a black approved earpiece. Keep your earpiece away from the microphone at all times. I recommend you remove it when you're speaking. When you're not using your earpiece, there's a small sticky on your desk that you place the earpiece there. I thank you for your cooperation. So I'm Senator Rebecca Patterson. I'm a senator for Ontario and chair of the Subcommittee on Veterans Affairs. And I'm joined today with the small but mighty group of my fellow honourable senators, and I'm going to welcome them to introduce themselves. Please note that we may have another senator join us as we are talking. Please do not let that break your stride, and we will carry on with our meeting. So I'm going to start to my right.
Senator Dave Richards from New Brunswick.
Thank you.
Oh, we are small but mighty.
No, we are.
Welcome, Marty Deacon, Senator from Ontario.
Welcome, John McNair from New Brunswick.
Thank you very much, senators. And before welcoming today's witnesses, I'd like to provide content warning for this meeting because we do have people watching us online. Today, our subcommittee is studying veterans' homelessness. Very sensitive subjects, including trauma related to military service and RCMP service, homelessness, and gender-based violence may be discussed. This may be triggering to some people in the room with us, as well as those watching and listening to the broadcast. Mental health support for all Canadians is available by phone and text at 988. If you are a veteran, you can call 1-800-268-7708 to speak to a mental health professional now or whenever you need it. Senators and parliamentary employees are also reminded that the Senate's Employee and Family Assistance Program is available to them and offers short-term counselling for both personal and work-related concerns, as well as crisis counselling. I'd now like to welcome to the subcommittee our witnesses for today. And so what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go left to right. I'd like to first welcome from the RCMP Veterans Association, Mr. Mark Gaillard. Welcome. I would next like to welcome from Veterans Emergency Transition Services, or VETS Canada, Ms. Debbie Lowther, and she's the Chief Executive Officer and co-founder and military veteran herself. Next, I would like to introduce Lieutenant Colonel Retired James Ostler from the Respect Forum, Canada. He's the Director of National Programs and will be giving the opening statement on behalf of the Respect Forum, and also Colonel Retired Gisèle Fontaine, who is the Women's Outreach Coordinator. So thank you for joining us today. We will begin by inviting you to provide your opening remarks, to be followed by questions from our members. I will also like to remind you that you have 5 minutes to provide your opening statements. Please just keep an eye on our clerk and she'll let you know when you're coming to the end of your time. And after you provided your statements, we will move towards the first round of questions and answers. With that to be said, please proceed when you're ready. And I'm going to go in the order I have it on the paper, just to make sure I'm there. So I'm going to ask Ms. Debbie Lowther, who will deliver opening remarks on behalf of VETS Canada. Please proceed when you're ready. Thank you.
Madam Chair and members of the committee, it is indeed my pleasure to appear before you today to discuss veterans' homelessness. Thank you for the invitation. I'm the CEO and co-founder of VETS Canada, Veterans Emergency Transition Services. I'm also the spouse of a veteran of the Canadian Armed Forces who served this country proudly for 15 years until his career was cut short due to injuries, both physical and psychological. He was diagnosed with PTSD in 2002 and was released from the CAF in 2005. Together, we founded VETS Canada in Halifax in 2010. VETS Canada is a national registered charity that's dedicated to providing immediate, on-the-ground assistance to Canadian Armed Forces and RCMP veterans who are homeless, at risk of becoming homeless, or otherwise in crisis. We have hundreds of volunteers across the country, and we have had the privilege to provide support to thousands of veterans from coast to coast to coast. We operate 24/7, 365 days a year. We recognize that every veteran's situation is different, therefore we tailor our support to meet the needs of each individual veteran. First and foremost, if the veteran isn't already connected to Veterans Affairs Canada, we ensure that we get connected so we can be certain that they are receiving any benefits to which they may be entitled. Our staff and volunteers then work with the veteran to develop an individual support plan to help them achieve their goals and meet their needs. Veterans come to us for support in a number of ways, through our 24/7 188 crisis line or through our website or social media platforms. Some veterans come from other organizations or agencies. However, the majority of our referrals, between 70 to 85%, come from VAC case managers. In 2014, we were awarded a contract with VAC, making us national service providers to the department in the field of veterans homelessness outreach. In 2018, the government chose to end that contract, instructing us to apply for further funding through the newly announced Veteran and Family Wellbeing Fund. Since 2018, we've received funding through that fund, but it's interesting to note that the amount of funding we receive is not sufficient to cover the number of referrals made to us by the department. In 2022, VAC was seeking to gain insight into the extent and nature of veterans' homelessness to ensure supports were being dedicated to the veterans who needed them. To achieve this, they determined that they required an expert with a national veteran peer network and existing infrastructure in working with veterans experiencing homelessness to conduct data collection and outreach in both official languages in all provinces, including Northern Canada. They chose VETS Canada to conduct this work. At the end of the project, we were able to report that we had connected with 2,330 veterans. 406 were women, 139 self-identified as Indigenous, and 65 self-identified as 2S LGBTQAI+. In preparation for my appearance here today, I took the time to watch the previous sessions focused on veterans homelessness, and I would like to address some of what I saw and share what our experience has been so far in the negotiation process with Infrastructure Canada for the Veterans Homelessness Program. As you know, between Budget 2021 and Budget 2022, approximately $107 million was allocated in support of veterans homelessness. In April of 2023, a call for proposals was issued with $72.9 million available for rent supplements and wraparound supports and $6.2 million available for capacity building. Under the rent supplements and wraparound support stream, organizations could apply for up to $6.5 million over 5 years, which is what we did. Applications were accepted until June 23, 2023. Finally, in January of 2024, we received an email stating that our application had been approved and someone would be in touch to begin negotiations of the project details and budget. To say that the negotiation process has been prolonged, difficult, and frustrating would be the understatement of the century. First, we were advised that even though we are a national organization, we would only be tasked with supporting veterans from Ontario East. As this seemed unusual, we asked questions. The response we received from an infrastructure staff person was that if we didn't like it, we didn't have to accept the money. And things have gone downhill from there. In March of 2024, we were advised that since they had taken so long to get things in place, and the whole first year of the funding was already ending, the funding would now be $5.2 million over 4 years, rather than the original $6.5 over 5 years. So we lose a full year of funding. Since being told that our application has been approved, we have had no fewer than 5 meetings with Infrastructure Canada staff, and we've been asked to provide more and more and more information at the end of every meeting. But on the flip side of that, infrastructure is not reciprocating in the sharing of information that you would normally expect in a negotiation. For example, at one point it was stated that while VETS Canada does great work, we might not meet the terms and conditions of the project. When we asked if we could review the terms and conditions, we were told that it was an internal document and could not be shared. During the meeting of this subcommittee on April 17th, a senior ADM from infrastructure stated that one of the reasons they are taking so long to get this program rolled out is because they're dealing with a number of veterans-serving organizations who don't have experience with homelessness, and those organizations may need extra support. VETS Canada's sole mission from day one in 2010 has been veterans homelessness. So if it's taking this long to get an agreement in place with us, we can only imagine how long it will take for the organizations without experience in the homelessness field. In closing, I would like to state on the record that while we are truly grateful to have our application approved for Veterans Homelessness Program, we're deeply concerned about possible repercussions from Infrastructure Canada in light of our criticisms here today of the negotiating process. With that, I'm ready to take your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments.
I apologize for that. I didn't know this was on and on, so.
Thank you. So next we'll go to Lieutenant Colonel Retired James Ostler for your opening comments. Please proceed.
Good afternoon, Senators. I'm James Ostler with the Respect Forum, and with me today is Gisèle Fontaine. Thank you very much for this opportunity. In the Respect Forum, our mission is to create a network among organizations who support CAF and RCMP veterans, emergency responders, and their families in meeting the array of challenges such as transition, mental health, and housing instability by promoting collaboration that improves the delivery of services. And we accomplish this mission by managing 5 lines of operation. I'll stress 3 of them here today, and we've submitted all of our notes to you. Our main activity is forums and special meetings in more than 20 towns and cities across Canada in the spring and fall of every year. These forums promote information sharing and collaboration amongst the different organizations. We have our Indigenous Advisory Circle. This builds and improves relations and services to First Nations, Métis, Inuit veterans, and first responders, their families, and communities. And our 5th line of operations is Women's Outreach, which connects providers that support women veterans and first responders and recognizes the intersectionality of being a woman, including 2SLBTQI+, race, Indigenous, and disability. Now, veterans homelessness is a recurring issue we hear and learn about at all of our Respect Forum meetings held across the country. Organizations such as Homes for Heroes, Veterans House Canada, the Good Shepherd Ministries in Toronto, and the Centre of Clinical Excellence, Legion Veterans Village in Surrey, BC, are making a positive impact by providing housing for veterans. These are different housing models that provide excellent supported housing solutions. And these organizations, these 4, are all part of the Respect Forum Collaborative Network. And these organizations and the service they provide are in addition to the city and municipal-run programs providing supported housing to the homeless across the country. But it's often difficult to determine how many homeless veterans there are because of identification challenges. However, these models do not necessarily meet the need of women's veterans. Veterans homelessness is a complex problem and needs to be approached with different supports and different strategies. Women's Outreach connects the service providers across the country that support women veterans and their unique needs, and homelessness is a frequent topic of discussion. It is evident that assisting women veterans experience homelessness is a significant challenge, as they are even more difficult to find than are the men. Furthermore, they will not be drawn to congregate accommodations with large numbers of men, as they may not feel safe, especially if they experienced harmful conduct during their service. These environments often replicate the conditions where they were harmed. Gender-responsive housing solutions must be developed for women veterans with wraparound services to prevent and address homelessness. Indigenous homelessness is often complicated by geography and the isolation of communities in the far north. And finally, and this is something new for us, an idea, finally, is that a national registry of available supported housing resources for veterans would be a positive step towards quantifying the infrastructure part of the solution. That's my opening statement. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ostler. And now we'll go to Mr. Gillard. Please correct me if I've said your name incorrectly. Thank you.
Madam Chair, Honourable Senators, my name is Mark Gaillard. I am a veteran of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police and of the Canadian Armed Forces. I have recently been appointed by the Board of Directors of the RCMP Veterans Association to be the program coordinator for the new RCMP Veterans Homelessness Program. Although the association has been in existence since 1886, it was first incorporated under the Canada Corporations Act a century ago in 1924. A decade ago, in 2014, the Association was granted its Articles of Continuance under the Canada Not-for-Profit Corporations Act. Today, the Association has over 7,000 members across Canada, organized in 30 chapters, which we call divisions. This number compares with the roughly 24,000 RCMP veterans across Canada in the broader RCMP veterans community. Delivered by volunteers, the Association has a very active support and advocacy program which aids our members and their immediate families. The Association also provides administrative services on behalf of the RCMP for eligible beneficiaries under the Force's Benefit Trust Fund, as well as regular grave inspection and upkeep services for the Force. Although not defined as veterans in the legislation of Veterans Affairs Canada, the RCMP has partnered with Veterans Affairs Canada for more than 60 years to help retired regular and civilian members and their families. This is by virtue of Part 2 of the RCMP Superannuation Act, which stipulates that any serving or former member who is permanently disabled due to a service-related injury or illness is eligible for a disability pension under the Pension Act. Honourable Senators, you may be surprised to learn that as the numbers of Second World War and Korean War veterans, as well as the pre-New Veterans Charter veterans, decline over time, the RCMP veterans and their survivors will be the only growing cohort still under the Pension Act. In 2015, we had a death of a homeless RCMP veteran. He died alone in a Manitoba winter while living in his car after being evicted. The Association assisted the family financially with funeral and other arrangements and ensured that our veteran was given a dignified burial in the RCMP cemetery in Regina. It was very much regretted that we were unaware of his situation until after he had died. Since then, the Association has assisted 2 other RCMP veterans from becoming homeless and a surviving spouse who required financial assistance to avoid the loss of her home. As many RCMP veterans, whether retired or having short service, do not consider themselves to be veterans, there is an immediate need to develop awareness and communication strategies and programs to ensure that the broader RCMP veterans community is informed of the assistance and support that is available to those at risk of becoming homeless. This will be the first mission of the RCMP Veterans Homelessness Program to spread the word that help is available. I might add here that the Government of Canada's Veterans Homelessness Strategy is geared towards helping living veterans. In the past, we have found that in the case of RCMP veterans, it is the surviving spouse who is most at risk of becoming homeless. As we embark on this new program, we will need to consider how we can best help those surviving spouses. In sum, integrated into our existing support and advocacy program, the RCMP Veterans Homelessness Program will conduct initial research and survey work to identify the RCMP veterans community at-risk profile for homelessness. With these results, and with Government of Canada Infrastructure Canada funding, the RCMP Veterans Homelessness Program will develop guidelines and training, and the program will begin delivering assistance and services to prevent homelessness in the broader RCMP veteran community. Our program will not require an RCMP veteran to be a member of our association, but there may well be eligibility requirements for financial support. We need to be sure we help those in need before it is too late. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And now we're going to proceed to our first round of questions. I'm just going to give certainly understood, Senator. We know that you've just run from another committee, so thank you very much for being here. I will, before we get going, I'll let you get set up, and then I'll let you introduce yourself. So just as a preamble before we go in, thank you very much for all your statements. Very compelling. What happens at the coalface with those veterans, RCMP or former Canadian Armed Forces, who are experience housing insecurity and homelessness is one of the key areas that we're looking to study. And you have given a lot of food for thought, both the things that have gone slightly right, but also some of the significant challenges. So now I look forward to our round of questions. Before I start, I'll just pass an introduction here as Senator Veroni gets set up.
Hi, Tony Veroni from Ontario.
Thank you very much. So just a reminder to our Senate colleagues, we will have, for the first round of questions, we're not a large number, but on short time, we will go for 4 minutes. That includes both your questions and the response from our witnesses. If you're able to direct it at a specific witness, that would be appreciated. But to our witnesses, please know that we realize you all have valid responses in this. If you wish to add, and we have time left, we will certainly pass the floor to you. And with that, I'm going to go to Senator Richards. If he has a question, again, I'd like to treat him without warning, of which I do apologize, but certainly if you have a question, Senator Richards.
I do have a question. We were studying the effects of PTSD and trauma on veterans from the military and from RCMP last year. And I think this all fits into the question of homelessness and alienation. And I'm wondering, because of this, how come this is still in the shadows? I'm not talking about the panel. I know they are quite aware of it. But for Canadians, so many Canadians just don't seem to understand or know the volume of military personnel that are having desperate problems in our country. And I'm wondering too if this is part of the malaise in the entire military. I'm wondering if these are any way connected. 50% higher rates of male suicides among veterans and 250% higher suicides among female veterans. All this must in some way tie into the problem of homelessness and drug abuse. And I'm just wondering, because so many Canadians are unaware of this, and I'm just wondering if you have the same kind of feeling that so many Canadians are unaware of this problem. Anyone can answer, really.
Thank you. Please go ahead, Ms. Lowther.
I think that in our experience, people, the general public, hears little snippets from the media. So when the new Veterans Charter came about in 2006, we switched over from the Pension Act, where veterans would receive monthly pension payments for the rest of their life. The new Veterans Charter deals more in lump sum payments. And at that time, I think the maximum lump sum amount was $280,000. I think now it's a little over $400,000. I'm not 100% sure on those numbers, but that depends on the extent of the injury. So, but the general public hears, $450,000. Well, they think these guys are doing great. They're getting out of the military, they're injured, they're getting $450,000, but that's not the case. To get that full amount, you have to be a triple amputee, you have to, or worse, lose your life in service. So I think that's part of it. The general public they hear little snippets in the media and they aren't aware. We try our best to educate the general public on the issue of veterans homelessness, and we are surprised how many people say, why is it that we don't know about you? And I don't really have the answer to that, but I think a little bit is that the media doesn't cover it as much.
30 seconds left, so Mr. Guillard, please continue.
I would just add to that the veterans pension system was set up to help with those who were wounded in war and often had medical conditions as a result of their service. I think in the recent decades and years, the proportion of mental health injuries, PTSD, operational stress injuries, etc., has expanded exponentially and has overtaken the kind of medical, musculoskeletal, broken bones, war wounds kind of activities as opposed to the kind of care, non-medical care that mental health requires.
Thank you, Mr. Gillard. Second round? Okay. Thank you very much. We have on the list Senator Deakin and Senator McNair. Please go ahead, Senator Deakin.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you all for being here. Each one of your opening statements are very, very interesting, and a collective, obviously a collective concern and interest, but your paths have been a little bit unique going there. I'm going to start. I'm going to ask a question that I try to get to. We run out of time each week, but I'm going to ask it right off the bat. All of your departments, all of your organizations work closely with Veteran Affairs in some way, in somehow, in some capacity. So in your assessment from where you stand /sit, how equipped are they to deal with homeless veterans? It's not a question of people working very hard and the dedication of individual workers. What I'm trying to understand is if we need a new approach to how we approach the issue of homelessness at the federal level, which to me seems very, very disjointed. And I'm saying that with the dewest respect of something that's just beginning that sounds really promising. But I do want to get your feedback on the organizational piece that allows people to do their jobs in a timely way. Go ahead. Thank you.
Hi, James here again. So before we came today and in our preparation, we talked to Mr. Bob Tebow. He's the leader of our Indigenous Advisory Circle. And I spoke to him last night, and he sent me notes. And his response about the VAC responsiveness to individual cases was very positive. When he and his circle, the circle is 15, I think, across the country, all Indigenous peoples. And when they have found and located a veteran, an Indigenous homeless veteran, and reported it to VAC in that province, his report to me was that VAC was very responsive and things were done quickly to help out that individual to the amount they wanted help with. So that's a positive on VAC for that area.
Thank you. Anybody else? Yes.
So since 2010, we've seen a lot of improvement with VAC. I think there's still more that can be done. One of the biggest challenges that we see with Veterans Affairs is the inconsistency. This veteran could go to Veterans Affairs and get every service possible, and then this veteran with very similar needs could go to Veterans Affairs and not even be told what they're entitled to. So, I've said for a really long time that it would be helpful if the case managers had a standardized checklist that they can make sure that if a veteran's contacting them for the first time, they are educating that veteran on everything that they are entitled to. When it comes to homeless veterans, I think that, again, that's improved a lot. Veterans Affairs has implemented the Veterans Emergency Fund, which has been good when it works. There are issues that we see with that fund, but just the fact that it's been implemented, I think, is a positive step. And there are instances when a veteran does identify as homeless, then Veterans Affairs they do kind of put an indicator on their file. And so their applications can be what they call red zoned, so things move a little bit faster. But overall, things have improved, but I think there's still improvements to be made.
We have 30 seconds left. Please continue.
30 seconds. And did you mention earlier that, in fact, RCMP are a bit reluctant to see themselves in the needs of support and stepping up for homelessness? They don't see themselves as vets. There's a comment you made earlier. I just wanted to clarify that.
Yes, indeed. And because Veterans Affairs Canada, or veterans license plates, or support for veterans, that is all geared towards Canadian Armed Forces service. So RCMP members don't see themselves automatically as being veterans themselves. So what part of that word is that there are ways and means by which Veterans Affairs Canada, in cooperation with the RCMP, which was responsible for delivering. Let me step back a minute. There's an arrangement between the RCMP and Veterans Affairs Canada where Veterans Affairs Canada adjudicates and administers the programs that are available to RCMP veterans on behalf of the RCMP. there's a statutory transfer of funding to them. So there's a limitation to the kinds of services that are available to RCMP veterans because we're still under the Pension Act. The Veterans Affairs Canada recently opened an office in Montreal, which is dedicated towards RCMP case management.
Thank you to both of you. Senator McNair, on to you. And Senator Veroni, if you would like first round of questioning, and then I will ask a question after you. Thank you. Please continue, Senator McNair.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you to the panelists for being here today again, for your service. Thank you for that, and your continued service to veterans in Canada. Difficult conversations over some of these things, and I'm just curious. In 2018, I think you're aware that the president of the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness told the Standing Committee of Veteran Affairs that with a focused effort, homelessness could be eliminated within 3 years or less. We know that hasn't happened. But we're trying to, one of the things that some of us are struggling with is trying to get an idea of the scope and the scale, what we're really talking about. And in 2019, the Standing Committee on Veteran Affairs did the report, and at that time they estimated there were between 3,000 and 5,000 homeless veterans in Canada, with female and Indigenous veterans overrepresented. We've heard different figures put forward by the departmental people. I'm curious to know what your guesstimate is, and I understand it's a guesstimate, but my view is that that number is very inadequate or much lower than it actually is.
Hello. Good day. I just want to take the opportunity to thank you, honourable senators, for inviting us today. In speaking, I think it is very difficult to know this number. I don't think anyone really can estimate that appropriately. You know, if we speak about women veterans themselves, they're very difficult to find. They're practically invisible because of their circumstances. You know, they're not often found on the streets or in shelters, for example. You know, they're couch surfing. They use Airbnb if they can afford it. It's temporary. They live in their vehicles. The women's shelters don't necessarily automatically ask the questions whether they are veterans or if they if they've ever served. And as already mentioned, there's a lot of women that don't consider themselves veterans because the definition of veterans has changed over time. But they may have only served for short periods of time or not deployed. So in their mind, they're not necessarily veterans. And they may not want to admit they're veterans because they may feel ashamed of their situation. They may feel like they've failed, and you know, which is contrary to the soldier ethos. And they, you know, so they may not self-identify, and they also don't want to misrepresent veterans in that way. There's a lack of consistency, as I mentioned, in asking the veteran status in shelter intake staff, and it takes there has to be a trusting relationship that's developed for them to, you know, perhaps admit that they're veterans. And there's a growing number of younger veterans that medically release after deployment, and these veterans, they differ from the stereotypes of veterans that we may see, that we may know. And so, again, they're not necessarily going to be asked about the veteran status. And homelessness is a really traumatic and dehumanizing experience. Some have to focus on just navigating the threats and the dangers and looking for their next meal, their next shelter. So they don't have the capacity, the energy, the means to try to connect to veteran organizations to get assistance. And even for those that may help them, if the process is too complicated, and the fact that they don't have a fixed address, they may not be online, they're just going to get discouraged, and then they're lost in the system once again. So that certainly complicates matters. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to pass it to Senator Verone. Please carry on.
Thank you, and again, I apologize for missing your opening comments, but I did read all the material, and I developed the same question I developed at the last meeting, and when you speak about shelter, and in my definition of shelter, something temporary, as opposed to something that is permanent in nature, for, I guess, the veterans to get roots into a community. And when I read the report from the Forum on Respect and trying to get all these organizations to actually just talk to each other, do you see any validity in an initiative that would create a National Veterans Housing Authority that could go coast to coast in appropriate communities where the veterans are, and create first and foremost the shelter, and then build on that shelter the other items you need, whether it be mental health, whether it be women, whether it be, and they don't have to be the same modality of shelter. It could be like group homes in terms of in key locations, and partnering with other Canadian organizations that could deliver that, because we keep on going round and round in circles with respect to the issue, but I think everything starts with a roof over your head.
Yes, Senator, I think your idea has good merit. And indeed, I don't know if we need a national housing authority for that, but a first step would be to have a national registry of the different organizations and the amount of stock or rooms that they have available across the country.
And that does not exist?
To my knowledge, there's no national registry. But I think that the small, or not that small, organizations that are kind of on fire across the country now, like Homes for Heroes and Veterans House Canada, with their own organizations, they're non-governmental, they get a lot of funding from the government. I think that's a good approach, because they are perhaps less bureaucratic, and they are building houses across the country. And two models too is very interesting, and they're very different. So Homes for Heroes, it's transitionary housing. And so it's they say it's a hand up, not a hand out, and you're supposed to be in there from 3 to 20 months, and then back into society. But the Veterans House Canada model is different. So in Ottawa here, you have the Andy Carswell building, and that's permanent housing for a veteran. He or she, it's a nice apartment building, all closed in, and when they live there, they can live there forever or as long as they want. It's a regular apartment building with wraparound support and supports in there. And both organizations are wonderful, great, and expanding, and they're expanding across the country, and they are good solutions for that. But they are also, I think, competing for funds because they're not-for-profits or charities, and they are doing the business on the ground.
Okay.
You have about 40 seconds. Please feel free. Thank you very much. So I will take Chair's prerogative now and ask a question of you as well. I'm going to get into some of the questions on intersection of identity, which you have already brought up very nicely. Regardless of your gender, it's everything else that may create extra risk for both living rough, transient housing, and homelessness. I'm going to start with probably with Ms. Fontaine to ask a bit about when we talk about coordinating services. I've already heard as part of the opening speech wraparound housing that includes. Can you tell me what you're seeing on the different organizations you're with that is trying to come up with actual solutions for homelessness? And then I would request that Ms. Lowther comments as well, especially since you are at the coalface, that especially when we look at women and women with other intersections of identity, what you're actually seeing in terms of people who've been subjected to domestic violence, interpersonal violence, and abuse, because we know that in the Canadian Armed Forces, we tend to be service couples in there. So if I can go to Ms. Fontaine first, and then we'll go over to Ms. Lowther.
Thank you for your question. certainly that intersectionality is a notion that has recently evolved. And to recognize that, you know, the different backgrounds of a woman's experience, either when she was in the forces or as a veteran now, and being able to, so their lived experience is definitely going to be different based on that. And it's also the fact that the services that they need and the services that they actually want to access will be different. But it is something new that we're just getting on board with. And so we have still a lot to learn and to make those connections. And within Respect Forum, there isn't an actual committee or forum on just homelessness. When we gather the one groups, the subject of homelessness will come up, but we speak about all the different issues. But I do want to take the opportunity to mention the fact that there is a collaborative project that's been initiated in Montreal that certainly, if there's interest and if there is time, I can speak a little bit more about that. Thank you.
Ms. Lowther, please. And then if there is time, I'll ask the RCMP perspective on that as well. Please continue.
So we know that in the Canadian Armed Forces, it's about 16% of women who serve in the Canadian Armed Forces. Our numbers are higher than that. In our caseload, we have just over 20% of the veterans that we've provided support to are women. So they do overrepresent in that regard. I think it's important for us, we look at every veteran's situation on a case-by-case basis, and we develop a plan to help based on their specific needs. What we know is that women deal with all of the same things as their male counterparts, but then they also deal with a little bit more. Most of the veterans, in fact, more than 90% of the female veterans who have come to us have disclosed military sexual trauma. And many of them are fleeing domestic violence situations. They have children in tow. And I think, as was mentioned earlier, they're less likely to use shelter systems. They're more likely to stay with family or friends or even in their vehicle. We had a veteran just recently, actually, who was living in her van with 3 children. So it's more complicated.
Thank you very much. And about 30 seconds for the RCMP perspective. Thank you.
Yes, the main concern with respect to our RCMP veterans is that because many of them are aging, and they don't have programs such as VIP, the Veterans Independence Program, to help them stay in their homes. And these programs are not available to RCMP because they fall outside of the veterans' health regulations. Even though that under the Pension Act, there's still a survivor benefit, we still find that it is the spouse, whether the veteran is still alive or has passed, that is the one who's struggling with the precarious of their housing situation. So when we're looking at the Infrastructure Canada program, we're looking at subsidies or assistance to be able to meet the rent requirements and housing requirements so we can keep the spouses in their homes with their families and not become at risk of homelessness because of inability to pay rent or to meet expenses.
Questioning. I have Senator Richards and Senator Deakin, Senator McNair, and we'll go for about another 9 minutes. I say that because we do have to have a short in-camera session. So with that, Senator Richards, over to you.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thanks for being here. I appreciate this. This is a real problem, and in some ways it's like herding cats. I don't mean to be frivolous about this at all, but that's what it seems like. And perhaps it's because if a veteran retires, the military seems less obligated to be interested in their welfare, as if they're in a standardized division or a company or a regiment. And I'm wondering if that's a problem, because individuals that I know, 2 of them, have been committed to helping to start their own programs because they didn't get help elsewhere. So it's on an individual basis, and that's not a very, and they're heroic in doing this. But that's not the greatest thing in the world with the Canadian government, who doesn't seem to be wanting to back you. And I think it was Ms. Lauer mentioned standardized procedure. That might be part of the problem. And I'm just throwing this out if you could answer some of this. But could it be because also that as far as the health of these veterans is concerned, the health care is up to the provincial government and not up to the federal government?
I would say, excuse me, yes. It is a challenge when members release and they, move back to their home provinces. First of all, finding a family doctor is a huge challenge for everybody, veterans included. So it is a big issue, and we've had the conversation many times with Veterans Affairs and the CAF about providing that health care post-release until a veteran does get a family doctor, because we are releasing these members who are injured and ill, and their only source of health care is emergency rooms or walk-in clinics who will not prescribe a lot of the medications that veterans are having to take. So I think that could be a solution to provide that health care post-release. It would help a little bit, I think.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Yes, Senator, if I may as well. Syndrome, the way I see a lot of people, they spent 20, 30, almost 40 years in maybe the Army or the Navy or the Air Force, and it took care of them. They never had to make a doctor's appointment in their whole career, the whole works. And then when they retire, some of them think that I'm now a soldier of VAC, and VAC will take care of me. But I mean, they're not a sailor or soldier of VAC. That's not the VAC role. They belong to Kingston, Ontario, or Hamilton, and those city health services play a major role in all of those things. So, and it's a complex web to get health care and medical care in the civilian world. So that is a kind of a mindset thing, though, that we have to deal with, and it leads, I think, to a lot of bad feelings towards VAC, because some veterans feel that, well, I'm not being taken care of like I used to be, but that's just not going to happen.
No, but I mean, so if they have a tremendous problem with PTSD and are taking opioids and self-medicating, then I don't know if a family doctor will be able to help them. That's part of the problem too, isn't it, sir?
Well, I think, but the family doctor is the first step in the civilian medical care field. They have to get a family doctor, however that happens.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. So what we will do, given the time, is I will ask for the remaining 3 questions. We'll put them on the table, and then I give you the right that if you don't have time to reply to a specific thing, we do welcome a written submission. So we will go to Senator Deakin, Senator McNair, Senator Veroni, and if there's time, me too. Go ahead, Senator Deakin.
Thank you, and thank you for that. I would like to come back to what you talked about, the Montreal Collaborative Project. And so I'd like to hear, really trying to differentiate the bureaucracy, the leadership, and then what's happening on the ground. So I'd like to get a little more information on that.
Thank you very much. Senator McNair.
I just wanted to clarify, it was Ms. Lowther heard the frustration in your voice over some of these issues. To lose $1.3 million through someone else's delay just doesn't make sense from my perspective. Just to clarify, who were you dealing with? Was it infrastructure or is it VAC? So it's Infrastructure Canada. And did you ever get a response as to why, when you asked the question, Ontario East only?
Thank you very much. We'll come back for responses. Senator Veroni.
Yes, in the briefing notes, it told me that there's 8,200 members of the armed forces who transition from military to civilian life annually and need very little assistance. However, in a survey report that was conducted from 98 to 2018, it then stated 39% required assistance. And that's a huge gap in between. And if you have any insights as to why that happened and where was the problem.
Thank you very much. I'm going to ask the last one because there have been, as we have heard, housing solutions and shelter solutions already proposed. I'm very interested to get your impression on the efficacy of those solutions, how we can do better, more of the same, do differently, and what your recommendations are moving forward. And I recognize that may be a written response. So now I'm going to pass it back to you. We have about 3 minutes, so you can sort of give a 30-second précis. I might as well start with Mr. Gaillard, Ms. Lowther, and Mr. Ostler, and then Ms. Fontaine. Please go ahead.
Since many of the questions were more directed towards the Canadian Armed Forces situation, I'll give my time to them.
Thank you very much. Ms. Lowther, please continue.
So for your question regarding dealing with infrastructure, the process has been difficult, and the response we received for why Ontario East was that there are 2 national organizations who have received funding, so they've split the country up amongst the national organizations, and that the rest of the organizations are regional organizations, but the 2 national organizations will do Ontario East, Ontario West, and then fill in gaps as needed. So that was the response that we were given to that question.
Thank you so much.
Regarding the efficacy of housing, I would say that it's very individualized, as we talked about earlier. Some housing is transitional, some is long-term. I think it depends on the veterans' individual needs.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ostler.
Talking about the efficacy of the housing, so the Homes for Heroes Village in Kingston, Ontario, it has 20 units. They finished it up in January of this year, and in early February, they housed their first veteran. And I'm going to the official openings next week on the 4th of June. And I don't know how many of the 20 units are full now, but I'll find out next week, and I can email somebody if they'd like to find out how it's filling up.
Thank you very much. Ms. Fontaine.
And the project out of Montreal, it was as a result of discussion at a women's forum, and there was 4 organizations that decided to come together to work on a special project to map out all the services in Montreal, in the region of Montreal, that women veterans can access. And the goal is to identify all those services, identify the gaps, also, to make sure that that we're helping women veterans improve the services to women veterans, and also make sure that at intake that the question is asked about their veteran status. So that project is just getting started, but the group is very motivated, and it's just an example of the type of collaborative projects that can be generated after grouping these organizations together under a respect forum. So,
thank you very much for your response. And we're very sorry, it's a very fast hour. However, as I've said, if we would always welcome any written submissions that you have on any of these topics, because you are at the coalface of where this is happening. And so I'd like to, on behalf of all of my honourable senator colleagues here, to thank you so much for all you do for veterans who are experiencing probably the worst things in their lives. And thank you for all that you do. Now, to my colleagues, I would like to suggest that if you have the time, that we go in camera, and because we need to discuss where we move forward from here as we move into the summer session. So with your approval, we will move into in camera. Does that work for my Senate colleagues? So with that, we will suspend for 2 minutes. Whoops, my order was off. Suspend for 2 minutes, and then we'll come back. Thank you.